The key word for both of them is aggiornamento, which doesn't have a blueprint for the church in the 1960s or the 1870s or in the Middle Ages. So aggiornamento means the call to a creative vision of the future of the church that cannot be the same form of a few decades or a few centuries before. So here, aggiornamento means some reforms. I'm not saying that, and we should have more reforms, but the overall vision is not reformist, is not of a reformer, but it is much bigger than that. So here, another big similarities is exactly the fruit of this vision of the future of the church as aggiornamento, which is the most important decision made by Pope John in 1959 to call the Second Vatican Council, which was something that nobody expected, really nobody, especially after the First Vatican Council in 1870, where the Pope had been declared infallible, and for most Catholics, after the infallibility of the Pope, there was no point in having a council. But here, Pope John was a church historian. He had studied for many, many years the Council of Trent of the 16th century, and he thought we need something like Trent for the church in modernity, in global modernity. So he doesn't think in terms we should complete Vatican I, which was what most bishops were thinking. He thinks we should have a council as effective, as comprehensive as the Council of Trent in the 16th century, because the 16th century was the big shift. I mean, the breakup of the unity of Western Christianity and the Reformation. What Pope John saw in his life as a priest and as a papal diplomat in the bloody century of the 20th century, World War I, the confrontation with ideologies in the 1920s and 30s, World War II, the Cold War, he says something has shifted here in the world. The world is not the same world of the 19th century or of the 18th century. We need to rephrase the language of the church and some key ideas for a church in global modernity. And so that is what Pope John did, 1959, the calling of the council, and 62-65, the most important religious event in the 20th century and the most important event in Catholic history since the 16th century. There are some similarities with what Pope Francis is trying to do and has done, especially with the synodal process of the Bishops' Synod of 2014-2015 on marriage and family. And it's something that he says, I'm not creating this link. If you look at the documents, and the official documents that he publishes when he announces that synodal process, and the Jubilee of Mercy, which is the corollary, the completion of the synod, he quotes extensively the opening speech of Pope John at the Second Vatican Council of October 1962. He says, what I'm trying to do now as the first Pope that is not a European is the same or very similar to what Pope John did with the Second Vatican Council 50 years ago. So it's unmistakable. It is not something that you can just find in a tiny footnote. It's in the text. And it's the most frequent quotation of Pope Francis of text of Pope John. the opening speech of 1962, which is the most important speech of a pope in the 20th century and of Pope John the 23rd. There's a second thing that might seem a footnote here, but it's very relevant in light of what's happening in Europe in these last few days. You have heard of the series of terrorist attacks in France and Germany in these last few weeks, and they have provoked the reaction of some in the church, a few theologians, a few bishops, a few cardinals, calling Pope Francis to declare a war, a religious war against Islam, because they say we are in a religious war of Islam against us. So the Pope should stop talking about dialogue and reconciliation. He should brandish a weapon and declare that the church is ready to fight back against Islam. This is exactly the same in different terms, but exactly the same thing that the last encyclical of Pope John, Pacem in Terris, of April 1963 did. It was exactly that firm resistance against the idea that you can use the church, that you can give an ideological weapon to the church and use the church for something that is incompatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ. There are so many differences. And that doesn't mean, of course, that we should give up on self-defense. It's not that. But it's the idea of making the church an instrument of hate. This is what, and so there are many similarities between that fundamental intuition of Pope John that we are on this earth all together, and that the gospel of Jesus Christ is not something that can be used ideologically. And Pope Francis resisting these temptations, these invitations to really weaponize the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that's something that is really, really something that's happening today. And it's one of the most difficult things Pope Francis is trying to do. And we can go into that if you want in the debate afterwards. There's one final thing that I want to say about the comparisons between their lives and their pontificates. It is strikingly similar to look at the image of Pope John and of Pope Francis as popes, not just because of their physical appearance. This is very similar, but it's because the election to the pontificate as the Bishop of Rome and the Pope of the Catholic Church has liberated them, has liberated a spiritual energy in them which you don't always find. You don't always find. If you look at the appearances, the persona of Pope Francis and of Pope Benedict in white, you see that the white on Pope Benedict was almost crushing his figure. He was really feeling all the burden of that office. And that's remarkable because he accepted that, knowing that he was not exactly the right person of that. In Francis, you see that being elected Pope really has liberated energies in him. And this is one of the most interesting things of the most interesting things of the Catholic Church, where you can engineer as much as you want the next conclave by appointing this number of cardinals of your stacking. It's the most unpredictable electoral college that you can imagine. So I'm not the first one saying that if those cardinals who voted for him could go back, they would not probably vote for him. Not all of them, but some of them has also said that. So that it's not a secret. But it is because the papal office with Francis, and with others, but especially Francis right now under our very eyes, has liberated a special energy that is really, really interesting. So here, this first long section, which is more than half of what it is, so don't worry about that. These two parallel biographies, to realize there are many other things that I could say, but I will stop here. There are three elements especially that I think are very, very relevant to understand what kind of Pope is Francis. And the first element is he's being non-European, Latin American. So you may say, well, he's half Italian, so he's not really Latin American, which is true for many millions of Latin Americans, by the way. But this is very difficult to underestimate. Psychologically, it is a shock for many in the church that we haven't realized yet. So the amount of, let's say, freedom of expression against Pope Francis in the church comes from the idea that there is a difference in terms of quality between a European and academic Pope and the Latin American Jesuit. This is part of that. And I've said a few times that if you want to understand what is behind the non-acceptance or the criticism of Pope Francis, you should just look at the dynamics of the non-acceptance, of the non-reception, or the rejection in the United States of the presidency of Barack Obama. There are many similarities because they are both, Barack Obama and Pope Francis, the face of the future of the United States and of the Catholic Church, and that makes many of us uncomfortable. It's a real change. And so Latin America is very important for that, for the global reshaping of what Catholicism is. It's because the depth and the strength and the relevance of the Second Vatican Council in Latin America. There's no possible history of the post-Vatican II period in the global church that has not a special place for Latin America. It's where some big issues of the Second Vatican Council really become a symbol of the struggles of the Catholic Church in modernity. Second, there is another thing that is typical of Francis as a Latin American, is that he looks at the world differently, not just because he looks at the world from the southern point of view, from the point of view of the poor, and in this Francis is really a postmodern pope. When he looks at the world map, he doesn't look at nations as nation states. He looks in terms of vast geographical spaces, vast geocultural spaces. Most of the popes, the Roman Catholic Church has struggled for a couple of centuries, 19th century, 20th century, to deal with the idea of nation state. We have nation states. Yes. He moves beyond. he doesn't have a rhetoric of that you cannot be a good Italian, good American, and a good Catholic. He has moved beyond. He says, for how the world works today, we cannot look at things from a local, national perspective. We have to look. That is very different from Pope John's idea. From Pope John Paul II, John Paul had this theology of the nations. As a Polish, you can imagine why. Theology of every Catholic nation has a special voice. Pope Benedict has a theology of the Heimat, of the fatherland, which is not really your nation state, because if you grew up in Nazi Germany, of course you have a problem with that. With Pope Francis, he has a world map, has a GPS that is very, very interesting. The third thing, the third element of being Latin America, which is very relevant for what Pope Francis is trying to do today, he understands how important it is the struggle for democracy in our global world, which was something that was not particularly an issue for Pope Benedict, because Pope Benedict was much more worried of the problems of democracy. So all this discourse on relativism, so he was worried on what's wrong in democracy. Pope Francis, looking at the world of today, is much more worried with what's wrong with the absence of democracy. Just look at Russia, China, Eastern Europe, the United States of Donald Trump, hopefully, so we'll never say again the United States of Donald Trump, but that is something. So, as a Catholic in Latin America, he knows the price Latin Americans have paid to democracy. It's not something that goes back 70 years for him. It goes back 20 years, 30 years. So that is very relevant. Second element, Pope Francis and the Jesuits. So there are a few points that I think are clear if you look at his biography. One is the importance of formation. And that's very relevant because, for example, one of the things that official biographers don't say about him is that he's a failed academic, which I think is a compliment for a pope. But that's exactly a new way of relating academic scholarship, academic life, and pastoral life. For a long time, also because of the Second Vatican Council, in some sense, we thought that you need a certain kind of academic formation to be a good pastor. What's great about Francis is that after the pontificate of the Pope theologian, Pope Benedict, we have, in a sense, exactly the opposite. The jump could not be more visible. And we see that for him, formation is not something that has to do with your list of publications or your degrees or your. That's second, very briefly, because I said something about that already. The importance of failure for him. In the most important interview he gave to the editor of the Jesuit ran magazine Civiltà Cattolica in September 2013, Antonio Spadaro, the most shocking thing that you could see, and there was one of the translators into English of that text, so I read it 2 weeks before it was published, is his acknowledgement of his failures.